Thunderbolts is directed by Jake Schreier, starring Florence Pugh, David Harbour, Sebastian Stan, amongst other people, telling the story of a group of misfits, ranging from the secondary members of the Avengers and previous adversaries that certain Avengers came across during the Infinity Saga. And reluctantly, they unite together to fight an imminent threat called Sentry, or the Void, played by Lewis Pullman. I don't believe I talked about it to you guys through here on YouTube or any of my social media pages, but Thunderbolts was something that I was really secretly hoping to pull a big home run out of this one. Watching the trailers as they were coming out, it made me think that somehow this was going to be an unexpected surprise or a much needed return to form that the MCU needed. Gratefully, to get right into it, Thunderbolts is what the MCU needs right now. I don't think I would go as far as to say that it saves the MCU. It does look like the MCU is starting to course correct, because even Captain America Brave New World, with all the problems that movie had, it did have some sort of consistency in the background as far as the world building, and they were acknowledging certain things like from the Eternals with the island in the middle of the ocean. This one continues with that, with mentioning the previous events of Captain America 4, and even the post-credit scene, which we'll talk about later. Now, if you don't want to know what happens in Thunderbolts, I am going to go into some details. I feel like I can't really talk about it without going into it. I feel like enough people have seen it by now, but if you haven't seen it, get away. I gave you the warning. The fact that Thunderbolts is a straightforward plot is quite refreshing. I mean, obviously there are some acknowledgement of other events that have happened in this universe, but it's mostly set in 3 locations: New York, Utah, and the Baltimore, D.C. area. The plot really centers on Florence Pugh's character, Yelena, who's dealing with a lot of sadness and unresolved trauma from her past, having lost her sister, Black Widow, and dealing with some other stuff that she's been struggling with since her childhood. And as she says in the opening monologue, she doesn't really feel like she's doing anything worthwhile, and she has a desire for a change. But it's only when she's given a new assignment to go into this area to survey someone who turns out to be Ghost from Ant-Man and the Wasp, she realizes that she's been duped by Valentina, as well as the other people that she encounters there, from Ghost and John Walker from Falcon and Winter Soldier. And even the Taskmaster shows up. But then they get a surprise from a guy named Bob, who's sitting in a box inside this lab, which turns out to be an incinerator, which Valentina uses to destroy all the evidence that the government is going to use against her to prosecute her and put her in jail. And it doesn't take the 3 of them that long to realize that they've been duped. Yelena, John Walker, and the Ghost, because the Taskmaster gets killed. That was a pretty big surprise. I was kind of hoping that she would stick around for the majority of it, and I was waiting for there to be some kind of fake out and say, oh no, actually she's still alive, but she got shot in the head. I thought that something like a metal mask or something that was covering her face would have deflected it, but no, I guess she's dead. I mean, it's not a deal breaker for me, but I thought, oh, she's gonna come back though, right? Because they can't just kill her off right there. Oh, no, she's actually dead. Okay. The first thing to note about this movie is the tone. It's a very serious film, but it does have that element of excitement and fun to it. This is an MCU project, and the MCU is known for being very fun and lighthearted. It has that comic book feel, but this one takes a more serious approach. I would actually liken it to the first Ant-Man, where it does have some sort of a serious tone, but there is an element of comedy under the surface. And the themes the movie touches on is actually quite effective. Mental health, loneliness, depression, and feeling like you're not worthy of anything, which I think all comes to fruition in the finale with Bob as he's dealing with his own trauma, and Yelena's there to comfort him and bring him back to the light, so to speak. And I guess we have to state the obvious here, Florence Pugh, a total poser, by the way. She is really, really great in this one. I wasn't really sure how she'd be able to carry it, but I guess looking back in hindsight with Black Widow and Hawkeye, yeah, forget what I said. She rocks it in this one. She's able to put on a tough facade, but we can all see that there's something sad that's boiling underneath the surface that she needs to let out. And she's able to let it out with her adopted father, the Red Guardian, Alexei, played once again by David Harbour, who is hilarious. Sometimes, though, I have to admit, he did kind of get on my nerves a little bit because he was just really out there and obnoxious and over the top, and I get that's the character. He's kind of like Oz the Great and Powerful, who acts all showy and exciting when he's really not, and he's just doing it for the sake of it because he feels like he's better than everybody else. Admittedly, he did get a couple of good laughs out of me, but still, there were a few times where I went, dude, stop it. You're embarrassing yourself. The way they managed to get out of the elevator, how they're all bracing themselves against each other, trying to climb up the elevator, walking up, instantly took me right back to the Emperor's New Groove, where they're trying to walk up the sides of the cliff.
Right foot?
Who's right? Your right or mine?
I don't care. Mine.
Well, why yours?
Okay, you're right. Ready?
You know, it's a good thing you're not a big fat guy, or this will be really difficult. But it's all the things that Yelena says to Bob as she's trying to figure out what his deal is, and how they barely manage to get out of certain situations, all played for good comedic use, not in the way that it kind of undercuts the intensity of the situation, because unfortunately some MCU projects are guilty of doing such. Thankfully that doesn't happen here. It's really the right blend of comedy and seriousness as far as I'm concerned. Not to say that other movies haven't been able to do that all the time, but in this case it almost feels like a perfect mixture of all those things. And then Yelena gets a flashback to her past when she completes her first test at the Red School or the Red Academy, whatever it's called. She has to lure her one classmate out into the wilderness, and her teacher comes out from behind the tree and shoots her friend dead. I mean, we all figured that she's still feeling terrible over losing her sister, but then this movie wisely shows that there's more to it than just that, where she and Nat came from training with the KGB in Russia. The Red Room, I just remembered that. Okay, bear with me guys, I'm sorry. I don't know the comics that well. I don't really read comics that much, but I do know this from having done research online, so just bear with me, guys. Please correct me politely if I get details wrong. But it's not just Yelena. John Walker gets one of those when he grabs Bob's hand, pulling him out of the elevator shaft, and he sees a flashback to his time after the events of Falcon and Winter Soldier, or at least somewhere in that interim, where he was disgraced and disowned from the US government when he was appointed as Captain America. John Walker's basically a piece of shit, excuse the word, as Yelena describes him in the finale. And that's a very accurate way to describe it, because this is basically what would happen if Hodge from the first Avenger would have gotten this super soldier serum instead of Steve Rogers, who was a good guy. That's basically what you would get. And John Walker doesn't even try to hide it. I think he is aware that he's an ass, but yet he still acts like one anyway and doesn't even try to correct himself. But he's given a second chance by Valentina to actually do something worthwhile, becoming US agent. As far as complaints, I guess I'll address them as I go on. They're not really deal breakers or anything, but it's something that I wish the movie could have at least given some acknowledgement, or at least explained something in 1 or 2 lines as to what exactly was going on there. Ghost doesn't really get a whole lot of time as far as like her backstory or anything. We learned about it with Ant-Man and the Wasp, but as far as that interim between then and Thunderbolts, I would have liked to have heard what happened in that interim, whether or not she's still talking with Hank Pym and Scott Lang and all those other guys, and maybe some acknowledgement of the quantum realm. The movie's got other priorities other than that, so I realize that you can't really go into all those areas at once. But I would have liked at least some sort of clarification. And I would have been curious to see how everybody else's flashbacks would have been if Bob had touched their hands, like Red Guardian, Ghost, or even Bucky. But Bucky, I guess we didn't really need to know about that because we've already known his past for a long time. I guess to go into Bucky, Sebastian Stan is always great to have around. I think he's one of the more underrated aspects of the MCU, and I would say the most tragic character in all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now that he's gone through all those things, we don't really need to recycle those same habits again. So he's really used as the voice of reason and as like the unofficial leader of the Thunderbolts besides Yelena, telling the crew that you can either live with the past forever or you can do something about it, and inspires the team to go after Bob and stop him, and to go after Valentina, which I have to say here, just seeing Julia Louis-Dreyfus in the MCU is something that I never knew that I wanted. Admittedly, whenever she walks in,
I'm not treating you to lunch anymore!
What, you're not still thinking about this afternoon, are you? What, the grilled cheese? No, they always burn the toast. I'm not really sure if I saw her as a completely different character. I just saw her as Julia Louis-Dreyfus just having a good time in the MCU. Not that I'm complaining. Oh, and I just remembered she also gets a flashback when she touches Bob's hand too, giving us a little insight into what exactly her deal is. Again, I wish we could have gone a little deeper in that area, but I realized that it would have been too much for the movie to carry on its own shoulders. But underneath all that bravado is a tragic past. I mean, everyone's got their own story, right? And I did like seeing how her assistant Mel was feeling conflicted underneath, reaching out to Bucky in secret. Ultimately, she decides to side with Valentina anyway, but I did like seeing some of that there. Like, she just wasn't a blind loyalist who would do whatever her boss wanted to do. I've been holding off on talking about this, but Lewis Pullman as Bob or Sentry, I wasn't sure how this guy was going to go when he first comes in, because he acts all like a dweeb and very unassuming. But as the film goes on, there's this eeriness that starts to seep out from underneath. And we as the viewer are meant to think, okay, something ain't right with him. And the film wisely foreshadows in the opening act with Yelena's one mission, how the scientist tries to kill her because he's so afraid of what's going to happen with Sentry. Lewis Pullman was Bob in Top Gun Maverick, and now here in Thunderbolts, he's Bob again. I guess all you have to do is give him a character Bob, and he is in the club. I mean, if anything, I guess you could say that this is the adversary, so to speak, but not the traditional adversary where he's like, whoa. This is someone with a tragic past who's dealt with child abuse, and he just settles into the void, which is what he turns into, the void. I guess that's a thing in the comics, I'm not really sure, but he proves to be a very unstable and unpredictable force, because he says to Julia Louis-Dreyfus, why would a god take orders from anyone? And it plays into the whole dread that this character exhibits, because you don't really know what you're going to get from him in the next few seconds or what he might do, leading us into the finale right outside former Avengers Tower, near the same spot near Park Avenue where the Battle of New York started. There's all this debris flying down and the Thunderbolts start to save other people. I actually really like seeing that, and it's not something that I want to see all the time, but to see people who have been deemed misfits or losers by certain characters in this film to actually do heroic things, that's actually really refreshing. And it shows the good nature that these guys have underneath all of that dark baggage and all that stuff. So Bob goes on his rampage by covering all of New York in this dark black void. Immediately, what I thought of was the song Paint It Black by the Rolling Stones. I swear to God, you could have played that song in the trailers along with the Toadies song that plays in the trailers, which is not in this movie, but also the musical score by Sun Lux. I hope I got that right. It's very effective. I didn't really notice a whole ton of things that stood out, but the final moment when Yelena stops Bob from going too crazy on his own self, that one hits right in the feels. But another moment that really hits the feels is the pep talk Red Guardian gives to Yelena. She feels worthless because of what she's done, but the Red Guardian says, "When I look at you, I don't see your mistakes. You light up every room that you walk into. You have so much more to give." I'm paraphrasing on that last part, but that's basically the gist of what he said. And there's not like a whole ton of surprises that this movie offers, but if there's any sort of surprise that I can think of, it's probably that aspect alone. I wasn't sure that I was prepared for a counseling session watching this movie. I mean, I've had experiences like that in the past, but this one really hits home, maybe even more so in a way than other movies I've seen address this topic. Thankfully, I didn't have to pay nearly as much as I would for a counseling session otherwise, with insurance, mind you. But when she goes into the dark void, finally meeting Bob in the one room that he's hiding in, which turns out to be his safe space, as it used to be when he was a kid. And I really love what Yelena says to Bob, that even if the void doesn't go away completely, it will feel lighter once you start to share it with other people. Because he's of the mindset that there's no point in fighting it, so why even bother? But she gives him the advice that he needs to hear, and it lets him know that he's not alone. Then everybody else comes in to help him get out of there, and then he finds his own self, the black void, in the laboratory that Yelena was in prior, and he starts going off on the void, literally like Ralphie Parker from A Christmas Story beating up Scott Farkas. But then he almost gets enveloped by the black void again, and Yelena sees this, realizing that this is what the void wants. So she runs over to him and gives him that big hug, saying, "You're not alone. I'm right here." Every movie has got that one moment that you need of catharsis. That was this movie's moment for me. Because not everybody, except for John Walker, had Bob get inside their barriers like that. Yelena was really the only one that did. She's like the sister/mother figure that Bob needed in her life to let him know that everything was going to be okay. In fact, that whole sequence was kind of like a horror movie, where we saw a young child turning into a shadow and everybody else just vaporized into a shadow on the sidewalk or on the wall. When that girl disappeared, I went, oh my God! Not so horrifying, but it felt kind of surreal, if you know what I mean. Some sort of out-of-body experience that was happening. I really like seeing the MCU touching on all those things. Would I recommend kids seeing this movie? Probably not. I mean, I'm no expert on what age limits should be for entertainment, but I would say the oldest or youngest, actually, maybe 13 years old, 12, okay, but have adult supervision with them. That's all I'll say. But then the film ends with Valentina getting the press to come see what she's done, supposedly, with the Thunderbolts emerging out from the wreckage. And she dubs them the new Avengers who have saved New York. And then Yelena whispers in her ear, "We own you now." Because they now know what she was up to, trying to have them all kill each other. And if she does try to pull anything, they know what to do by going to the Senate committee. Oh, and the action is done really well by Jake Schreier. There's a lot of practical stuff that's used. Like when the truck flips over or the car flips over, the limo, and it feels like there's real stakes happening. It's not some glossy CGI green screen fest. Not that I'm against CGI in entertainment or anything, but in this case, it's actually quite refreshing. Again, I'm indifferent with whichever stuff they use, practical or CGI. I'm just saying in the case of Thunderbolts, it was much needed. In both instances, when the Humvee flips over and the limo flips over, instantly reminded me of the truck being flipped over in The Dark Knight. But then, there's the two post-credit scenes. This time, they're reversed. The mid-credit scene is the joke or the gag that usually comes afterward, and the post-credit scene is of crucial importance setting up for the next movie. But the mid-credit scene has the Thunderbolts on a cereal box of Wheaties, which actually explains the cover of one of the posters. But then the post-credit scene happens, which goes on for several minutes, 14 months after the events of Thunderbolts. They're all figuring out where exactly they fit and how they're going to carry the Avengers symbol going forward, but then they get word that an intergalactic vessel is entering the atmosphere. They pull it up on the screen, we see a ship with the number 4 on it.
No need to fear, they're here, just call the Four. Fantastic Four!
mean, other people have said that this feels like a classic Infinity Saga MCU film. In this case, with this being the final cherry on top, showing us where things are going to go next, this is something that the MCU desperately needs right now. I gotta tell you, just seeing that number 4 on that ship, I even recognized the ship before we saw the number 4 on it, from the trailers actually. As soon as I saw that ship, I went, oh, let me tell you, I cannot wait for Fantastic Four. So really, at the end of the day, Thunderbolts is a much needed return to form for the MCU. I don't know if I would say that it really saves the MCU, but I do think it is a step back in the right direction, something that the MCU desperately needs right now. There have been some home runs in the last few years, but Thunderbolts, I think, is really the unsung hero or the unlikely hero that's going to really start to bring everything home. And if the Fantastic Four is another step in that direction, we might actually be in good hands. But with the way that it addresses mental health, depression, and loneliness, and how these misfits or these rogues or losers, as they're described by some people, can actually find some good to use in their lives again and move forward from their past, surprisingly makes the movie emotionally relevant. So that's all I got for Thunderbolts. Thank you guys so much for watching. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on the Thunderbolts if you've seen it. And as always, see you in the next one.